Now, let's take a deeper dive into the latest move by Japan by getting some expert analysis, and we have three lined up. We begin with Waqas ADENWALA, Asia analyst for the Economist Intelligence Unit, who joins us through Skype. Mr. ADENWALA, thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Good evening.
First of all, I would like to ask you, how do you gauge the impact of this so-called whitelist removal on South Korean firms and the South Korean economy?
Obviously, since South Korea is a very export-oriented and obviously external sector-focused economy, having a ban or restrictions of any sort is going to have a negative impact for this US-China trade war. The restrictions from Japan are obviously more directly against South Korea, so the impact on South Korean firms will be quite negative. South Korean economy itself has not been performing well during this year in Q1. Q2 numbers were better, but primarily because of government support. So going forward, the economy is unlikely to do fairly well in at least Q3 and 4 if you just look at 2019 numbers.
Now, Mr. ADENWALA, it's widely believed that Japan's first and second round of export curbs against South Korea will not only affect the South Korean economy, but also the global economy by affecting the global value chain, as many call it. Many also point out that the moves will eventually backfire on Japanese firms. Your thoughts?
Absolutely, actually, because if you think about, let's just take semiconductor industry, the three components that were restricted in the first round, yes, if you think about South Korea being the biggest chip makers, they are also the biggest clients for those Japanese producers. So effectively, Japanese restrictions have killed off the clients for all the supplies in Japan. And when you also take about how South Korea supplies it to the rest of the world with the memory chips, Japanese firms like Sony, which use those memory chips produced in South Korea, are going to be impacted as well. So Japanese firms are going to feel the wrath of their own government's decision.
Right. And South Korea, as all this is going on, South Korea is planning to take this issue to the WTO. If not, they have already, but they're going to take the issue up again. How do you expect things to play out at the global body? Would South Korea be able to gain an upper hand in resolving this trade spat?
In plain terms, it will be actually tricky. It's not just about the upper hand or lower hand, to be honest, because the problems with the WTO is even if South Korea does get an upper hand, it's more about the time delay. The restrictions by Japan have been used, yes, unilaterally, but they're already going to come into place. So even if WTO decides in South Korea's favor, the time by which it happens, South Korean firms would have already suffered a fair amount. And also, Japan has revised the way it's actually classified as countries. So it's no longer just whitelist and non-whitelist. They've categorized countries into 4 different stages. South Korea is classified not in the first tier anymore. It's classified into tier 2. The lowest tier includes countries such as North Korea, for example. So they can basically try to justify their restrictions in the WTO body as well. So if at all, the arguments in WTO will actually drag on, in the meantime, continue to hurt South Korean companies. Even if the decision is in favor of South Korea, there's always a chance that Japan could request for an appeal, and that could again take more time. So yes, a victory for South Korea in that scenario would obviously help to, highlight to the world that how South Korea has been pursuing its stance, obviously, in a fairly right way. But then, when you think about Japan pursuing their stance, they will also try to make sure that their case is strong enough as well. It's basically more about the time delay than the actual decision that will hurt Korean companies, sadly.
Right, okay. Mr. ADENWALA, that's all the time I'm afraid we have for you at the moment. Thank you ever so much for your insights.